Hello guys, welcome to my channel and welcome to another episode of Politik Goreng. The next few episodes of Politik Goreng, including this one, will be about 100 days after the state election. So, I will be interviewing politicians or candidates that I have interviewed in my past episodes of Politik Goreng, and also politicians who have won in this last state election to check on what have they done in this 100 days period. In this episode, I'm excited to have the pleasure to invite someone who has gone on our Politik Goreng before to come back again to the hot seat and share with us his experience in the state election and his next step. Hello guys, so today I am excited to invite Azad on the hot seat to share with us its thoughts like after the state election and what he has done. Welcome, Azad.
Hi. It's good to see you again, Ken Hunt.
Yeah, it's good to see you again too. So without further ado, let's go straightforward to the questions. So I believe everyone has got to know about what happened to Syed Saddiq after the results of his accusation has been announced by the court. And yeah, would you mind telling us what's your opinions regarding Syed Saddiq getting the result of his case for money laundering, CBT, or what we call as criminal breach of trust and misappropriation of property? What's your thoughts towards the results of the case?
Okay, just to share, right, in my view, it's still very early to say anything about the decision, because really the information that we have before us is just that we have a verdict, as well as the various news articles which portray perhaps what sort of evidence was led in the court. But ultimately, what we will need to look at is actually the grounds of judgment, where this is a document that judges prepare when an appeal is filed, where they essentially set out the reasons for why they have come to this particular decision. And if the case goes on to appeal, it is within that context where the judge's views or decision and reasoning will be challenged. So anyways, when we have this document, then we would have a clearer picture as to what led to this conclusion, how the judge decided the case. What evidence did he rely on? What evidence did he refuse, or perhaps what evidence did he dismiss? And of course, this can be compared and contrasted with the arguments raised by the various lawyers. So it is only when we have all of this that really we are going to be able to comment or critique the result that we have got. So really, at this moment, I would say it's very premature.
I see. And the next question is that, do you mind sharing with us what do you think happened for the cases that Syed Saddiq is accused for? Because if I'm not mistaken, he's accused for four cases. So what did he do that makes him getting accused of those crimes? Because I believe a lot of us Malaysians, or a lot of us who's watching this video, what they know it's what happened to him. He's getting accused for that, and then he has to go to jail and all those kind of things. But we do not know what actually happens. So do you mind sharing with us what actually happens that makes him getting accused for this?
Let me perhaps just share that I don't have personal knowledge really about what happened in the case, because of course all this is alleged to have happened prior to the formation of Parti MUDA in itself, where I think it primarily concerns the amounts or accounts of Bersatu. All right. But from what I understand, based on public reports, on what you can see in the newspapers, news articles, etc., the four charges relate to two sort of cases, two factual circumstances. All right. In the first set, it concerns the sum of 1 million ringgit, which apparently was disbursed in two tranches. And from what I understand, this was withdrawn by someone named Rafiq, who I believe was the Bendahari of Armada at that time. So it seems that what happened was that Rafiq withdrew this money. I mean, there's two sides of the story, like essentially. There's of course Rafiq's version of the story, and you have Syed Saddiq's version of the story. Now, Rafiq's version of the story, as I understand, is that he received an instruction from Syed Saddiq to withdraw these funds for party programs, and so he withdrew this money, and then it went from Rafiq to two other individuals, Nakib and Daniel, if I'm not mistaken, are their names. So, of course, the circumstances of how this money was transferred on and whether what this money was actually used for, I've yet to see that in public reports. Now, whereas Syed Saddiq's version of the story is this, that Rafiq had approached him on the basis of requesting for funds from for various programs, and Syed Saddiq's instruction, I believe, was to just instruct him to speak to the various exco who are in charge of these various programs on the disbursement of the funds. And from then onwards, Syed Saddiq didn't have personal involvement. So, of course, we will need to really look and see ultimately what led to the judge forming his decision in that Syed Saddiq was guilty. So then, of course, we will later see, in the Court of Appeal, how how Saddiq's lawyers will argue the case on whether there were flaws in the judge's decision or otherwise. So I think, yes, that is essentially one, or rather, I'm not sure how many charges relate to this particular set, but this, as I understand, relate to the CBT charges. Then after that, you have this other amount, which is 120,000, if I'm not mistaken. Now, from what I understand, is that this concerns issues about election funding, like where Syed Saddiq's version of the story is that he withdrew his personal funds from ASB, etc., to finance his campaign during the 2018 elections? Can't recall. If I'm not mistaken, it's the 2018 elections. So, and at that time, Bersatu was not, or rather was deregistered. So I believe there was an issue about fundraising as well. So what Syed Saddiq did was that he used this company called ABBE, which I believe is a Bersatu-related corporation. So crowdfunding was done in this manner, where he raised the funds through that account. And after the elections, what he says is that there was a claim back where he retrieved that money in return to restore his personal expenditure prior. So it was his version of the story is that it's a claim back process. So thus the question is just really this, whether the 120,000 was Syed Saddiq's to claim back, whether there was a circumvention of I suppose Bersatu's policies in terms of finance management. But ultimately, in my view, this is going to be quite tricky, because at that time, as I understand, again, Bersatu was deregistered.
What does it mean by deregistered?
So that would mean that they were registered prior to that. Perhaps, I'm not too sure about the particulars, because it could be that they were deregistered, or it could be that they were not yet registered. This part is not quite clear to me. Yeah, but in effect, essentially, it was just that the party was not in existence. So there's going to be a question of whether there were internal processes to be complied with at that time. Yeah,
I see.
That is of course going to be a tricky legal question. I've not really looked too deeply into this, because ultimately, in my view, whatever whatever the verdict is, it's of course not affiliated to MUDA, and I believe that ultimately, as a party, we are going to have to stand on our own. I mean, you cannot have a party that has only one person. You are going to need multiple champions, and of course, the hope is that now, or rather, this circumstance has placed us in a situation where we need to identify and bring forth our new lineup for the public to see.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, do you think the case of Syed Saddiq is purely political, as in someone trying to put him down due to political conflict or competition, or it's not, as in, because we know that a lot of cases, whenever, this is what happened in Malaysia, whenever a politician is accused of a certain thing, the politician himself will always say, this is politics, this is nothing related to me, because someone is trying to accuse me because of political conflict or different ideology. So do you think in this case, it is purely political or it's not?
Well, what I would say is this, there are certain, I would say perhaps supporting points that may indicate that this is political persecution, but really it is very premature to say anything conclusive at this stage. Because ultimately, we don't know how the judge has rendered his decision. So, I have to very strictly and categorically say that it's very premature to say it's political persecution, but it is also very premature to say that this is a valid decision, that it is, it is for certain that Syed Saddiq committed a crime. No, we don't know that yet. Really, it will have to go through the entire judicial process. We are at, I suppose, the conclusion of the trial case. A verdict has been announced, but yet we know that there's an appeal that is going to happen. So really, it will come down through all these processes. We will have to go through the entire process.
Yeah, so we really have to wait for the appeal, the results of the appeal to be announced, and only we can know what's the conclusion of this case, right? I see.
Yes.
And what do you think will be the future direction of the party moving forward? As in, because we know that after he was announced to be guilty of all of these 4 cases, he stepped down as the party president, and we know that someone else, which is one of the deputy president or vice president of the club, took over his position. So what do you think will be the future direction of MUDA? Is it going to be a tough way forward, or what's your thoughts on this?
Okay, my thoughts on this is that essentially, I think Malaysia is starting to realize that there is a need for a third force, that there is a need for the issues that MUDA has been championing, which is for local government elections, or perhaps a shift towards a proportional system of elections, as well as the various other progressive policies that we have been pushing for, which is more representation for women, for example, or maybe the environmental agenda. So these are all the sort of issues that you do not see our 2 largest and perhaps well-established coalitions pushing for. So there is indeed a space for MUDA, but of course, in terms of the future direction of the party, this is going to largely hinge on the internal party elections, which, as I understand, is due to happen next year. So this is, of course, a moment of, I would say, determination for the party, because once we have our internal elections, all the spokespersons for MUDA would then have the legitimacy to actually represent MUDA. At this juncture, everything is on a pro tem basis, it's on a temporary basis. And of course, there's always going to be a question of legitimacy. When we have that elections, the internal party elections, that is when legitimacy will be seen to have been seized by the representatives. So that is the moment of determination.
I see. And now let's move on to some question that is sort of like specific to you and your constituency, because we know that for all of you watching this video, you know that Azad is one of the candidates for Kota Anggerek, which he competed, he stands in our last state election, which happens like about 2 to 3 months ago. So today is actually the 100 days after the state election. So we're going to ask some questions specific to his constituency and also what he has done after the state election, despite losing in the state election. So I'd like to ask, just this first question, I believe it's really, it brings to a lot more following up questions afterwards. So first thing first, will you still consider your, to sort of compete again in the next state election or even the January election?
Okay, there are two decisions that will determine whether I contest again. First of all is my own internal resolve. And on that part, I will say that I'm open to it. In fact, I would actually say that, yes, I would very much like to participate again in the state elections or even the general elections. Now, on the second part, which is, of course, ultimately, it is a question of whether the party is going to nominate me as a candidate. So on that part, that will have to be up to the party.
I see. And as we know that participating in a general election or a state election, it requires a lot of fund, right? As in, when you want to participate in an election, at first you would definitely have to pay a certain amount of deposit. And if you lose the election by like a certain amount, if you do not get a certain amount of vote, then there is a possibility of you losing the deposits. And also you need fund for campaignings, printing posters, and hiring like media team and all those things. And we know that MUDA doesn't really have a lot of funds or do not have like a lot of sponsors in terms of all these political campaign. What's your point of view towards it? Like in the future, is it possible for MUDA to get more like sponsors in terms of financiership so that more candidates from MUDA will be able to compete in a state election or general election?
Okay. Well, firstly, in terms of fundraising, right, it's my view that there's always crowdfunding, and ultimately crowdfunding is going to be dependent on public support. So that will, of course, be the challenge that we will have to bear in ensuring that we can raise enough funds to finance our various campaign initiatives, to ensure that we have the right people up there in government to push forward the ideals that we would like to champion for, the policies that we want to see implemented in the country, or even at the state level. So in terms of course, whether we are going to be able to raise those kind of funds, well, we have 5 years to put in the work to convince the public that, to convince the public that we have the capacity, that we have the ability to actually push forward the agendas, the issues that are the public's concerns. And I believe that in terms of our capacity and capability to identify and to work on the policy, I believe that in that respect, we are ahead of perhaps some very much other established parties. But in terms of machinery, that is something that we will have to build up to by the time of the next election. Because as you know, we had only formed very much in consequence to Langkah Sheraton. So there was not much time to build up accordingly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what are some of the initiatives that you have done after the state election to solve the issues that people in your constituency are facing? As in, what are your initiatives, even though you lose the state election and you have the hope of wanting to, if you're given a chance, you definitely want to stand again in your constituency. What have you done to try to convince the people? And also, what has MUDA done to gain more public awareness?
Okay, at this juncture, I would say that things are still very much in their nascent stages. It's still very early. But of course, the issues that I have championed on during the state election, they continue to be worked on. Like, for example, of course, we have arranged for programs with the Shah Alam Forest community to highlight the issue of this particular plot of land that connects these two other forests being taken over and breaking apart essentially these two areas where they're no longer forests that are linked to one another, which of course affect the local flora and fauna, the habitat of these animals. So we have arranged for a hiking program to bring awareness to this issue. We would like to, of course, have further engagements with them as well. We will also be organizing gathering in solidarity for the upcoming decision, which I believe is towards the end of this month or perhaps early next month. I'll have to check my calendar to be certain. All right. So that is one example of what we have been working on. Another issue that we've been working on is, of course, the sinking land in Satya Alam.
Oh,
but of course, we're still on. Correct. Yes, but that is.
I didn't know about it.
Yeah, we're still in a sort of fact-finding stage, and of course, as the advocate and solicitor, I've offered my services on a pro bono basis. But we're still taking time with the persons affected. We're still waiting for them to furnish us the needed information to begin a lawsuit. So that's where we are at. Or rather, I would say perhaps to ascertain whether we are able to proceed with the lawsuit. It's still very, very much in the nascent stages.
I see. And also, knowing that you will have the one to compete again in the next state election or January election, how would you change your strategy the next time if you are standing on an election? What would you do differently as compared to this previous state election that you have competed in?
Okay, I think the huge crucial difference would be this. In the previous state election, of course, there was we were always behind time, where there was a very, I would say, a tight timeline in terms of candidate selection, and of course, candidate preparation for the coming state election. There was a very, very short time, and of course, the preparation that we had was not going to be enough for us to attain as wide of a reach as I would have liked to, which is why we had to take a very unorthodox approach of going down to the streets and engaging with the public on an ad hoc basis. But of course, on a global, with a global view at the moment, in general, our angle now will be, of course, to have the sort of build up through the next 4 to 5 years, so that the public would know who our candidates are. So I think that would be the market change in terms of strategy. Yeah, but as to, of course, what policies, what sort of issues we will be championing, while of course we will, as Progressive Party, we will of course hinge the bulk of our views on progressive ideals. But as to which issues we will be focusing on, that will of course be only determined closer towards the election. There will of course be a question of what is going to be the public need, what is the priority rather of public need at that time. So these are the things that we will have to weigh and consider as it comes closer to the election date.
Yes, I agree with you, because what the public needs, what are the issues that it's facing, the people might changes according to time. So perhaps people now are facing crisis with flood, but perhaps that would have been solved throughout this period, and afterwards they may be facing another problem. So this has got to be looked into as the time as it comes closer to the state election or the January election, right? And we've come to the end of this interview session. And before we end this session, Azad, do you have any last words or like a few thoughts that you would like to share with everyone watching this video?
Perhaps I would just like to share why it is important to have proportional representation, because I think this is something that many Malaysians they don't quite follow, because they may be of the opinion that, look, you're trying to change the rules of the election, right? Well, or rather, these are this is a common criticism for anyone who proposes proportional representation electoral system. But really, this is actually, in my view, perhaps the best way to have the composition of parliament reflect the exact sentiment of the wider public. So if you were to study perhaps the Netherlands model of proportional party list system that they have, essentially the idea is that if, let's say, 10% of the public votes for party A, this should reflect more or less the exact composition that you have in parliament. So if 10% of the public believe in a party, 10% of the 10% of the seats should be owned by that party.
Party A.
That's correct. That is essentially the idea. So, of course, when you have this implemented throughout the whole of Malaysia, you will see parliament become more representative of the actual views of the wider public. Whereas now, in this current circumstance, it's going to be very much contingent on how the seats are drawn. So essentially what you have is a scenario where the previous government determines how the lines are drawn, how the seats are composed, whether a seat is going to be a supersized majority of 90 over 1,000, 100,000 like what you have in Bani, or is it going to be a tiny parliamentary seat with perhaps 36,000, 38,000 voters. So when you compare perhaps like a seat, what's it called, Bali, and perhaps one of the rural seats in Pahang, or perhaps even Zaid Hamidi's seat, which average about 40,000. So that would mean you have one voter who has twice the power as compared to perhaps an urban area, if not 3 times. So this kind of disparity really has to be addressed and has to be solved. We need to have a government that actually reflects the public. That's why it has to be in proportional representation.
Okay, thank you so much, Azad.
It's going to be crucial. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Right. Thank you, Azad, for sharing with us your opinions and also what's your view towards MUDA moving forward as a party. And thank you so much for taking your time to attend our interview session on Politik Goreng. And for all of you who's watching this video, thank you so much and see you again in the next episode of Politik Goreng. Bye.
Bye-bye.